Social media. Should Gary Lineker shut up? Welcome to Mark and Pete. Here's a thought.
A social gag. When celebrities' tongue go wagging, with too much bragging and nagging, and audience figures are flagging, it's time to stop the slagging and get out the gagging. Oh, yes, indeed. Well, new rules published by the BBC flagship presenters should follow their particular corporate policy. It seems that the BBC is trying to curb those maverick presenters from simply encountering the issues of particular responsibility with respect to the BBC's impartiality. Well, what is impartial, Clergyman Pete? I ask you. Many celebrities, such as Gary Lineker and many others that we'll cover, seem to take to social media quite regularly on very controversial subjects. Should they be told to shut up?
Yes, they should be told to shut up because I don't like them. They say silly and annoying things. And my real view is it's difficult to say that certain people shouldn't be having their views aired just because you disagree with them. So I think that you have to be very careful here because I have to be very careful. It's sort of a principle with me that you have free speech, and if you don't have free speech in a society, you end up with tyrants. So free speech is very important. So should they be told to shut up? Well, only in very specific circumstances. Now, when Carol Vorderman selflessly left her work for BBC Wales, and the mega salaries and fame and kudos you get from being part of such an august institution, or possibly she was sacked from a little TV station. Two different interpretations of the same event. I think that it was justified in that she is a representative, a public representative. In fact, that's her job, to be a public representative of the television shows of which she's a part. So I think that her and Gary Lineker making comments when he's a public face, that's he's speaking on subjects. If he's going to be opining on politics and having views that many people are going to be angry with him about, it's going to put the BBC in both cases, into disrepute. So I think that's possibly fair enough. But I think it's almost like, I'll tell you what it's like, Mark. It's like you almost have to say, well, how many Twitter followers do you have? You know, if it's just for your mates, you're just making a comment. How can that be held as bringing the company to disrepute?
Yes. Well, here's where it gets a little bit grey, doesn't it? Because let's be honest, social media is a relatively new concept. It seems like it's been around for centuries, but let's be honest, it's been around primarily for just over 20 years. Now, the point behind it is that whether you're using well-known channels like X or formerly Twitter, whether you're using YouTube, LinkedIn, or anything else, the fact is that there are means to communicate with an audience. But if you're representing a particular corporation who has a particular policy that's asking you to sign a certain contract to do something very specific or not, surely as an employee, you should honour that. Now, one of the reasons the BBC has tried to implement certain restrictions is, in their case, their policy, which is around rules of impartiality. So the principle being that their product, their service, is about conveying the news. If they had an employee such as Gary Lineker or Carol Vorderman breaking out of that, then it contradicts their contract. Now, I can understand in Carol Vorderman's case, she's taken the decision to say, if that's the policy of the BBC, I don't want to do that, because she wants, in her case, to have the ability to have freedom of speech on social media. Now, whether you agree with her content or not is a different matter. Now, Gary Lineker is a different individual because he is still employed by the BBC and yet goes on social media and continues to talk about very sensitive subjects, and of which, as you mentioned, some of them are very, very sensitive political subjects that are unfolding as we speak. And really, that's the bit where I would say that he doesn't even come from, a position of evidence. It's not as though he was from a military background or from a political background.
And
He was a former
expertise, he
footballer.
doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't
He doesn't
really
have
have
the
the
expertise,
expertise.
and
No.
yet he's still giving his views. Now, of course, in his head, he believes that he should have those views. Well, that's fine. But my point is, if you look at it from the point of view of the BBC as an employer, they're saying that your contract is such, you now have to follow these guidelines. And I suppose this is the key here because, we could debate this quite extensively, but in my opinion, I respect Carol Vorderman for what she has done. Not that, again, that I'm endorsing what she says, but what I do have an issue with is Gary Lineker having his cake and eating it.
Yes.
Basically, he's
Yeah.
got freedom to do whatever he likes, even though he's countering the policy of the BBC.
Yes, but we could take this to a different extreme. Say, for example, you have someone who works as a plumber. That's his job. He
Yes.
mends pipes under your sink and that sort of thing. That's what he does. But he does it for a firm, and he doesn't work for himself. He's working for a company, and he's putting controversial things out on Twitter. Perhaps he's very much in favour of Britain leaving the EU. Perhaps he was, a few years ago, and he was putting out these things. Or maybe these days he's very pro-Israel, and he's got friends who are Jewish, and he's very much in favour of the current military action by the Israeli government. And the company decides he shouldn't be putting that out on social media.
Yep.
But he's a plumber. Is that reasonable for them to demand? In other words, is it reasonable for someone in a normal job to have their employers reading their social media to check that they're saying the right things?
I suppose that this is from a company perspective.
Yeah.
If the company doesn't have anything in their contract which constrains them in terms of what they can and cannot do, or more importantly, doesn't bring their company or any of their employees or associates into disrepute, then I think it's right that, so for example, if that plumber said, I prefer to vote Tory as opposed to Labour or whatever choice of party it is, or any other subject, then they can do that. Go back to the Gary Lineker situation, because back in March of this year, 2023, Gary Lineker made some quite inflammatory commentary about comparing the UK asylum policy to the 1930s Germany. And that would now breach the rules of the guidance that were put in post that commentary.
Yes.
So what they're saying basically is that type of narrative is something that the BBC as a corporate company, as an organization, but as we all now know that it's very much as an organization representing the people, because that's how the BBC is funded. But either way, it's still a corporate corporation, and they issue contracts that would now break the guidelines. I think that the point here is that we've seen that social media needs some greater governance, in my opinion. I don't just mean necessarily from individual companies, but I do think that there needs to be stricter guidelines in terms of, or at least clearer guidelines about what people should be able to do and shouldn't be able to do. Now, here's the thing. Social media has been around a reasonable period of time. There are different types of platforms. There are different techniques. Some of it is by text, some of it where you have an image, etc. The reason I mention that is that social media is becoming far more sophisticated now, and it's very easy to post not just words and get your commentary that way, but also imagery. And sometimes imagery, iconography, cartoons, as we've seen, could actually cause more harm than we have seen in the previous century. And so I think that what really should happen is, I don't think you can rely on common sense anymore. And what I mean by that is that even though that somebody might post what might be to some an amusing cartoon may be offensive to others. And so you can't rely necessarily on individuals. What I think we need is something where companies take more responsibility to educate their staff, because most people are employed and they have some sense of guidelines. But I think there should also be more guidelines from governing bodies. And I mean, in some ways, some of these platforms themselves could also help, but they don't. What they do is they just allow you to post. Now, what we have seen, interestingly, is that Elon Musk has tried to change some of that policy to have that ability to not cancel people. We've heard of this term, cancel culture, where you're cancelled on social media. Sure. So, Closure Pete, I ask you there, do you think the social media companies should help with guidelines on how to use their channels?
Well, that's difficult to say, because I think that they do. I mean, I know how you could, for example, limit your tweets or your Facebook posts so that just your friends see them. I mean, this is certainly possible if you want to share views but don't want it for the wider public. You can do that. But I think that it's mainly unreasonable. This is what I think you could do. There are certain things that you wouldn't be allowed to require of your employees in a contract. Like, for example, if you have a man working for you and you require him not to have homosexual relationships, you're not allowed to do that. And in a similar way, you're not allowed to require of someone that they can't have certain religious views. You know, that they have to be allowed to do that. You can't. That's seen as being bigoted. You're not allowed to do it. And there are laws about that. So there could be a law saying, well, you're allowed to have different views on social media, and there's nothing you can do about it as a company unless it's specific to the job. So yeah, it would be in the contract, but it has to be actually specific to the job. So you could be taken to court if you tried to put it in, it wasn't specific.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would say the man who was employed as a plumber, if he was going around saying that these pipes are awful and there was no basis for it, then he should be sacked. He's putting it out on social media. That's different. And I could see that this thinking is already there out in the thinking on this among companies, because I heard discussion, and it was mentioned by one BBC spokesman, about the nature of the shows that Carol Vorderman and Gary Lineker present.
Yes.
Well, they're not politics shows, so it doesn't matter what their politics views are.
Yes, exactly.
You see, it's not going against the impartiality of the BBC, because that is not their job. So the argument is out there as to whether you agree or not on that. My point is that the argument is out there. So I think it needs to be arrived at. There will need to be, I hate more regulation, but there will need to be some sort of regulation on it, I think, going forward. But the problem we have is it'll never catch up, because there'll be something new down the pipeline. Maybe the social media's had its day. There's something else that we don't know of that's coming.
Oh dear. Well, I wonder what our audience thinks. I mean, what do they think about going to social media?
Yes,
I mean, first of all, we want to hear from you folk, but more importantly, which platforms do they prefer, and do they like the fact that celebrities have the opportunity to speak their minds?
Yeah. And just as a follow-up, how did you hear about this particular episode? Which social media platform were you on, or was it just in your feed, come up in your podcast feed? Let us know. Remember to go to markandpete.com. Make sure you're subscribed, and you can then comment on this and every episode. But for Mark and myself, it's bye for now.